All right, thank you so much, guys, for coming. So today we're going to do lecture 4, tissues, glands, and membranes, and we're going to talk about the 4, major connected tissues in the body: the epithelial, which skin is made up of, and then the connective tissue. The other 2, nervous system and nervous tissue and muscle tissue. We'll really cover them later on in the other lectures, so I'll quickly go through that stuff. But we'll really talk about epithelial and connective, and how they're classified, and their functions, and the systems in the body where those tissues are found. All right? And with that much, all right. So we got tissues, of course. Remember when we talked about in the earlier lecture, we were talking about growth, and we said growth includes increasing number of cells, increasing the size of the cells, and we also talked about the extracellular matrix. And so extracellular matrix is the substance between the cells. And the major difference between epithelial cells and epithelial tissue and connective tissue is that connective tissue has more extracellular matrix or extracellular material than it has cells, whereas epithelial tissue has a lot more cells than it's got extracellular matrix. I think you had challenges with that definition in the Lensman modules in terms of how we classify. So we're going to classify epithelial tissue based on the cell shape and layers. And we're going to classify connective tissue based on the matrix, the extracellular, because that's what there is most of on the connective tissue. Okay? And then we'll talk about what is in that extracellular matrix. All right? So that's very important. And of course, histology is the study of tissues, because why? It studies the cells. Okay? And and the characteristics of cells. So again, like we said, we will do these 2 in great detail, and these ones I'll go through them rather quickly, because we will have several lectures just on muscles, on the muscular system, and then several lectures on the nervous system. Okay, so we'll go through them quickly. All right. So before we talk about all these tissues that make up the body, we're going to talk about where they come from. At conception, about 18 days after fertilization of the egg by the sperm, you have what looks like a disc at that time, and that disc will have 3 layers on it: the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. All right, and then that's what gives rise to all the 4 tissues in the body. All right, endoderm gives rise to the digestive system. Endo means inside, so this is in. All right, and they are called germ layers. Again, because all these tissues that we're going to talk about today germinate from these, 3 layers on the embryo, which is 18 days after fertilization. That's when these germ layers form. So the endoderm gives rise to the digestive, and the mesoderm gives rise to muscle and bone. Okay. M for muscle, M for mesoderm. Because in the exam, I do want you to sort of tell me where some of these tissues originate from. Oh, of course, and I will walk in the wrong direction. All right, thank you. Okay, so the ectoderm, ecto means outside, and the ectoderm gives rise to the skin, which is all epithelial tissue. And also, even though it's internal, gives rise to the nervous system. Okay, we'll talk about, like I said, just a little bit about the nervous tissue for now. We'll cover it later on. And so they're called germ layers because they give rise to all the tissues, all the cells in the body. They are what they are called pluripotent stem cells. Pluripotent. It can become any kind of cell that you want it to become. These cells that we find in these 3 layers will become all the tissues, and they're pluripotent. They can pretty much become whatever tissue the body will need. All right? So that's why they're called germ layers. And so epithelial tissues, all right? And so most of the characteristics of this will depend on the cells. And then the classification of epithelial tissue will depend on the cells, all right? In terms of how many cells are, what's the shape of the cell, how many layers, right? So, like skin covers the surface of this. Of course. It covers the surface, like skin, okay? Like I said, compared to connective tissue, it has very little extracellular matrix. And, okay, thank you. And more cells than we have extracellular matrix, right? And then usually has a basement membrane on which the cells are layered on. It's a basement membrane, and it's avascular, meaning no blood vessels. Avascular. Okay? It is no blood vessels. So these are the characteristics of the connective tissue. In the cells themselves, all these things here can be described by this drawing here. So let's say this is our basement membrane, right? And then we got our little cells. One epithelial cell, nucleus. Second epithelial cell, nucleus. And 4 nucleus. All right? So what do we have here? I think some people should travel with this module too. This is the exposed surface, which is called the free surface. And does anybody remember from the module what it's called? It starts with an A. Apical layer. The free surface is the apical layer. Free surface. Okay, free surface. Okay. So that's the apical layer right here. All right. And then of course we'll talk later on about the cell-to-cell connections. So the lateral sides are connected to another cell. So this will be the lateral side, lateral side, lateral side, connected to another cell. By those cell junctions, we covered a little bit about, we're not talking about the cells, but we'll talk more about those kind of junctions. They could be tight junctions or desmosomes and so forth. And then hemidesmosomes connect the cells to the basement membrane. So this part of the cell that is connected by these hemidesmosomes to the basal or the basement membrane is called the basal layer. All right? So this is the, I'll do my basal layer. So, and that is the basal layer. Okay? And so that's all these 3 things. Okay? So that's pretty much how you can describe epithelial cells. When it's layered, you will still have these cells that are attached to the basement membrane, and you still have cells on the top that are exposed to surface. Right? So, and this is the primary example of how the cell shape affects the location and the function of these tissues, of these epithelial tissues. The one will kind of give us an example, and we'll talk a little bit more about it when I show you all the epithelial tissues in the different systems. It's the respiratory system in the lung, which is for exchange of what? Gases. So you're going to need a bunch of layers of cells or just one cell layer. Are you going to need cuboidal cells or flat cells? Flat cells. So single layer, which is called simple, and flat is better equipped for exchange of gases quickly. Because you might be suffocating while the oxygen is traveling through, you know what I'm saying? A bunch of layers of the epithelium. So you need flat cells, and they are called squamous. It means flat, not square, but it refers to the flatness of it, okay? And then, of course, you know, it's got to be simple. Simple refers to the number of layers, so which means it's one layer. Okay? So, and we'll talk a little bit more about it when I show you another table. All these systems and all the possible locations of these tissues. functions. So first of all, we start with the general functions of epithelial tissue. As we already talked about, protection, covering. Unbroken skin is the first line of defense for the body, right? And in the morning, I was talking about how if you get a cut, what do? You might clean it up, right? And what else do you do after you get a cut on your skin? Yeah, with Band-Aid. Why? Because if you leave it exposed again, there's a chance for additional, infection. So that's why we always cover the Band-Aid until it heals and seals up. Then you can remove the Band-Aid. But skin is the first line of defense, and also the oral mucosa. Although the epithelial cells lining the cheeks and the mouth are moist, as opposed to these ones which are dry because of keratin. All right. So act as barriers, okay, so that the outer layer of skin doesn't absorb. Imagine if you jump into the pool and you start absorbing the water through your skin. No good, right? You don't want that. So it acts as a barrier. You don't just absorb stuff. You're not like a sponge. Otherwise, that could mess things up, dilute all the reactants in your body and whatnot. Besides, you never know what you can do. And then, of course, it's selectively permeable. It permits the passage of substances, like in the lungs, permitting passage of substances. Like the oxygen, the carbon dioxide gases, so permitting passage, and then secreting substances. All the glandular tissues, we'll talk about them later on, are epithelial tissue, like salivary glands, sweat glands, all those. Some of them are single-celled, like the goblet cells that you find lining the small intestine and the stomach, producing mucus, okay, and those are classified as unicellular. Some of you had problems with, in the module about the classification of those single-celled glands. They're called unicellular, right? So mucus, sweat glands, those will be the multicellular ones. That multicellular. So, in the absorbing substances, of course, the epithelial tissue lining your small intestine, especially, is those microvilli that we talked about, the safest area to absorb, right? So, if I were to ask you about the general functions of epithelia and where they may likely be found, which organs or which systems, then you talk about this. And it's more intuitive. You just think about skin and the digestive system, because that's where all those are lined up by the epithelial tissues. Okay, and you get all your functions, 5 points. That's kind of long answer question I would expect, from you. I might ask you about that. That's like a long answer question with 5 points. All right. So epithelial tissues. Moving on, and we're going to classify them according to what we have the most of. And in this case, we have a lot of cells. So we're going to talk about the number of cell layers they are. We're going to talk about the cell shape. We're going to classify them according to that. All right? And so when we say simple, we're talking about something that is one layered. Simple means one layer. Okay? And then stratified, strata is like layers. Stratified, so it's layered, it's multiple layers. Right? And then pseudo-stratified is something that appears stratified because of the location of the nuclei, but it's one layer. Okay? So pseudo means fake stratification. That's what it is. And I'll show you a nice picture later on, but you have cells like this. They're usually long columnar cells like that. And then you have nuclei, and then it's one nucleus, not two. I like how the board just gets it everywhere. Because it's magnetic, it just goes like that. So this is a line of them, and then here these cells may have. So it gives the appearance of having a layer of cells here, a layer of cells there, because of the location of the nuclei, right? But it's one layer. So pseudo-stratification is like that. That's what it is. And the other one is transitional. Transitional is found in organs like the bladder that will stretch, Okay, so this one is multi-layered, and it's called transitional because it will transition from a certain shape before it's stretched to another shape when it's stretched. Okay, so before stretching, you have about 5 or so layers of cells, and they are cuboidal in shape. And the top layer, the one that's free, is kind of dome-shaped because it's kind of, you know what I'm saying. So that's what happens. So the top layer will kind of appear like this. Okay, and then the other layers are down there. Yes, dome-shaped like this. And then when you stretch the organ, like when your bladder fills with urine, then you have a few layers because the cells will spread out, fewer than the 5, and then they become squamous, flat. Okay, so that's why they call it transitional, because it will transition from cube-shaped before stretching to squamous, flat cells when it's stretched. All right, so that's transitional. And then when we talk about classification and function, we'll mention all these and where they might be found. Right? Squamous, we already know that's flat, you know, not square, but flat. And then cuboidal is cube-shaped. And then of course columnar is elongated cells. All right. So squamous, simple squamous. That's one layer, and we already talked about it. It's mostly found in the glands. Okay, the alveoli, you know, they have one layer of cells that are flat. The capillaries also have one layer of flat cells. Capillaries exchange blood and so forth. All right. So one layer is mostly the lungs, and it's flat cells, and it's diffusion. And at the end of, after showing you all these tables of the classification and the functions, I will show you, you know, certain characteristic and the kind of functions it is most suitable for, which will go along with what we will have talked about. Okay, so lungs because of diffusion, and then simple cuboidal epithelial in the kidneys, lines the kidneys. One of the module questions asked about the location of cuboidal simple, 2 locations. You've got the tubules of glands in the kidney, and also the choroid plexus in the brain. When you start to talk about big cells, big cell volume, like cuboidal as opposed to flat, we start to talk about something that a cell that produces something. Okay, like the cells lining the ventricles of the brain, they are cuboidal because they produce cerebrospinal fluid. Imagine if you didn't have enough volume and you're trying to produce something like in a flat cell, let's say a squamous cell. You won't have enough organelles and all that to be producing that. So you need something that has a bit of volume, and all the glands have either columnar cells or cube-shaped cells. Because they're producing something, you need a lot of organelles, and you need a lot of vesicles to be packing your whatever you're producing for that gland. All right? Okay. And some of the, in fact, the cells lining the kidney and the ureters, they may have some mucus production a little bit to prevent the caustic effect of urine, because urine is acidic. You know, if it's passing through your urethra all the time, it will start to corrode it. Okay, just like the stomach is protected by mucus from the hydrochloric acid of the acid. Right. So once we start to talk of volume, we start or produce something. The cells get big, see, cube shape, because they are much bigger now. All right. So and this all this and some of the bronchioles, which are the tubing in the lungs, they produce surfactant, which causes the tissue and a bit of mucus as well that is used to trap particles and push up so you can cough it out or whatever. All right. So the cells will be cuboidal because they produce something. Right. All right. So and then simple columnar and these simple columnar cells, some of them are ciliated, some of them are, have microvilli on them, depending on where they are. If the ones that have microvilli are located in the small intestine, of course, to increase the surface area for absorption, and the ones in the lungs, lining some of the ductwork in the lungs, the bronchioles and so forth, have cilia on them to move the mucus and trapped particles out of the respiratory system, right? Okay, and then the ones in the uterus and also in the uterine tubes, the oviducts or fallopian tubes, they have cilia on them because to move the egg along towards the uterus, all right? So we've already talked about 3 different parts where you can find the simple columna. Usually they're ciliated, and the ones in the brain are also the ones that produce in the ventricles that produce the cerebrospinal fluid. They have cilia on them so that to move and circulate the cerebrospinal fluid. All right? Okay, so that's that. These cells also have between them these goblet cells, which are producing the mucus, especially in the respiratory system, because the cilia on top, we said, moves the mucus with the trapped particles along. Okay, so you've got those goblet cells that produce mucus. All right, and then of course pseudostratified columnar. This is the one that we're saying gives the appearance of stratification when it's actually one layer of cells. Okay, it's not 2, and it's always ciliated, and you find it in the lungs as well in the bronchus. Like the major. So from the trachea, the first division of the trachea is the bronchus, the primary bronchus, and so you find these kind of cells again to move mucus and trapped particles out. Right, the auditory tubes, same thing. If you notice, it's kind of hairy in there too, in your ear, and you have wax that you produce also to trap particles, because wax is sticky. Have you ever cleaned your ears with a Q-tip or something, and in fact you see how sticky that wax is, so that things don't get. It's kind of gross, but anyway, after lunch, it goes to the tympanic membrane, which is very fine membrane. You don't want to get things to infect it. So you have that protection. So you have this kind of movement of the mucus system, but wax, the earwax, moving out towards the outside. Right? And that. So you have that, and then of course the bronchi and the nasal cavity as well. The nasal cavity, especially the sinuses, because they also clear up gunk. When you breathe in air, it's got all particulate matter, especially now they're harvesting, you get all sorts of stuff in there. So that mucus is important to trap that, and that ciliated columnar or pseudostratified columnar cells will move it out. You can sneeze it out or cough it out. So we've been talking mostly about just the cell shape. So now we're talking about the layers, and see where, when we talk about layers, we are talking protection now. Like the skin has got multiple layers. In fact, imagine if you had just one layer of skin cells. I mean, it will just, boom, it's done. Okay? So you have multiple layers of cells, and it's good for protection, just like the functions we mentioned at the beginning. Remember when we were mentioning the different functions of epithelial tissue in general. All right? So skin is a prime example of stratified squamous. They start off, though, by the basement membrane is cuboidal, all right? Because those cells are actively dividing, okay? So they are like whole cells. And as you approach the upper layers, they then flatten out to be squamous, and they get filled with keratin, and they are dry, dead cells, right? So starting from here, these are very much live cells, no keratin in them, because this is where you are producing the cells that will eventually replace your epidermis. Okay, when we do skin the next time on the Tuesday, we will talk about how every 40 or 30 to 45 days you have new skin on you, because the old skin sloughs off and you have a new layer of skin. So, and it's replaced by these basal cells near the basement membrane, which are actively divided. Okay, so that's skin, and it's keratinized or not keratinized. And of course, in the moist areas, like in the throat, in the cheeks, like when they take a swab to do those, DNA tests, they're taking moist cells. Okay, that's why they prefer to take those cells than the dry ones. Okay, because it will be easier to, and you have all the organelles in there; they are nice and moist. You take those and you can get your DNA nicely. All right, and then so stratified cuboidal. All right, once we start to become layered, and also a volume of cells is getting bigger. Here, it's glands. All the glands, like here, these stratified cuboidal salivary glands. They produce in the strictly located here in the mouth. They produce saliva. Okay, so salivary glands, ovarian follicles, right, are also like that. Because the cells that surround the egg, they're called follicles. They later become the corpus luteum, which will release hormones, progesterone and estrogen. Okay, so anything that is going to secrete something is going to be a high volume cell, cube-shaped cells. Right? Anything that's going to have diffusion is going to be a flat kind of cell. Right? So that's that. Stratified cuboidal. Right? And then we get stratified columnar cells. Right? And these are found also in the larynx, the voice box, mostly. Mammary glands. Again, when we start to classify glands, some glands, they release portions of the cell. Okay, with it, like milk releases portions of the cell, and then the other secretions to go with it. So if it's a very small flat cell, you're not going to have many portions to be pinching off of those cells. So they tend to be longer, cuboidal or columnar cells. Right? So you pinch a part of that cell, you still have some cell left. So this is production, secretion. Okay? There's even more layers and there's even more volume. It's columnar cells. The male urethra is like that as well. Portion of it. A portion of it is made of those cuboidal cells we talked about. I guess these ones produce maybe most of the mucus that lines it to prevent the acidity of the urine from, eroding the urethra, things like that. And then transition, of course, we talked about the bladder and how they transition from the cube-shaped cells to the flat cells. And layers become less because the cells will kind of stretch and go between themselves, all right, from about the 5, all right, and the ureters as well, okay, and then the superior part of the urethra, right. Other organs that stretch like the stomach, they have folds called rugae that will increase the stomach volume as you're eating, but for this, you have the transitional epithelium which actually stretches. Okay? All right. Okay, good. There you go. So, more epithelial tissues, functional relationships to structure. That's why we always do this together, anatomy, physiology, very closely related. And so, simple, you have one layer, and usually they will be flat too because of the diffusion. You get diffusion and your secretion and absorption as well, so that you have less, material to go through for that process. Stratified, of course, is going to be protection like the skin. It's many layers in the epidermis, many layers, and then not many, but the dermis is thick though. You've got 2 layers in the dermis, and then subcutaneous tissue. So stratified, and then squamous, flat, will be filtration, diffusion, all right? And it's usually related to the simple. Usually if you're going to be doing filtration and stratification, you don't want multiple layers of cells. You just want the one, all right? And then cuboidal columnar, we're now talking production here, like we said. Secretion of something, producing some sort of secretions. And absorbing too, because some of the cells in the intestines, once they absorb, say, the fats, they've got to process them on the fatty acids and then repackage them and then attach them to proteins so that they can go through the blood. Why can't you just put the fats in the blood? Because it's aqueous environment, right? So they have to be processed, so you need a cell with more volume to do that. All right? So you can see how easily the functions are related to the characteristics like the shape or the number of layers. Okay, it's more intuitive that, you know, if you were to ask about that, you know, it just comes naturally, you should, especially if you associate reasons for those functions or for those structures. Then it becomes easy. And we've kind of covered this already. Well, maybe not this, a smooth surface. Like in the endothelial lining of the capillaries, the ones that release the blood and nutrients and everything to the tissues, they have very smooth lining inside. The blood vessels, if it's very thick, if it's rough, what happens is when blood comes across rough patches in the blood vessels, the platelets will start to clot and become sticky whenever they come across any rough surface. Or sometimes that's why you shouldn't have a high fat diet, because the fat tends to be deposited in the blood vessels, and then it creates a rough spot. So when blood is rushing through it, it will clot there, and God forbid, sometimes the clot will move and then clog some smaller arteries. If it's in the heart, then that's how you get a heart attack. You see what I'm saying? So the smooth lining of those is very good for that. Also, imagine if the blood had to go through rough surface, the pressure would have to be higher. The smoothness also allows that easy movement of blood in the blood vessels. Otherwise, your heart would be overworking just to push the blood through. So the smoothness is really has multiple advantages for the water, right? And then, of course, we talked about this before, microvilli. It increases surface area for absorption in the small intestine, and then the cilia, which does what? Moves substances on the surfaces, especially the lining of the respiratory tract, the lining of the uterine tubes, or the fallopian tubes, and so forth. Right? So these are the cell junctions. All right? Because we're talking about cells, the tissues, those cells are going to be attached to each other. And there's tight junctions which occur around cells that wants to prevent permeability of substances to go through between the cells. So they're tightly connected together on those lateral sides, okay? So you have a tight junction on the top here, and just below the tight junction is what is called, you see this part here, it's called an adhesion belt. Adhesion meaning connection. So you have an adhesion belt that goes down, almost looks like a desmosome. And then on top of it, you have a tight junction. You see this tight junction. So the whole thing is a tight junction, but you have this here is the adhesion belt that goes all the way around the cells and attaching them together. And then on top, you have the tight junction, so that things do not permeate between the cells. So that's what that does. And then, of course, the desmosomes. Desmosomes are like spot wells or areas where you have a strong mechanical connection between the cells. And you find them a lot in cells like muscle cells that are stretched and contract and do that. Okay? So a desmosome, you have, part of it is on the one side of the cell, and then you have the fibers going out, and then the other part is on the other side of the cell. So that's a desmosome. It's a full desmosome. And in the smart modules, you get trouble with what connects the cells to the basement membrane. You get problems like that, and that's a hemidesmosome, because it's half a desmosome. Hemi means half. Hemi is like semi, or semi, if you like. Okay? And you see, because there's no cell on the bottom here, you only have the one part here with the fiber. So it's half a desmosome. It's a hemidesmosome. So hemidesmosomes attach the basement membrane to the basal layer of the cell. Right? That's the basal layer. Okay? So you get that, and then of course the gap junctions, very important in cardiac muscle and the muscles, smooth muscles. Okay? Like in the small intestine. Because smooth muscle in the small intestine, it contracts as a unit, And so these gap junctions are like channel proteins. You know, they've got a little hole in between it, so that if an action potential is passing through here, through one cell membrane, which is pretty much just moving in and out of ions through the membrane. Okay, so they'll be able to move in and out through this membrane too on the adjacent cell, and then on the next cell, so that the wave of depolarization will spread through all the cells as if it's one membrane. So these allow like the heart to contract in unison. All the muscles of the heart have to contract in the ventricles or in the atria, contract once. In fact, you have problems if some muscles are contracting and some are resting. The heart is not going to pump effectively. Okay, so gap junctions are very important for that electrical conductivity and its action potentials, passage of action potentials through cells so that they contract together. It is called a syncytium. It's a functional syncytium because they contract as if it's one cell because of these gap junctions. They contract at the same time. All right. So those are them, the connections between cells. And now we move on to glands. And glands will be classified according to literally the shape of the gland. All right. And also they are classified according to how the product is secreted. Okay. Some products are secreted without the cells of the glands pinching off. Okay, which we're going to call merocrine glands. And then the apocrine glands, which we just talked about, with the mammary glands, they pinch off part of the cell, and then it's released with the secretions, like milk. Or some of them, like the sebaceous glands, they will, release a whole cell full of the oil, full of the sebum, and then that whole cell will burst, and then the mixture of the cellular debris and the oil is what is called sebum. So that's called holocrine glands. We'll talk about that. So, and if these two, endocrine and exocrine, these ones secrete from within. So they secrete, and the substances or the secretions go right into the blood. And it is the blood that moves around. All those hormones that are released into the blood, okay, they enter from the endocrine system. All right. Exocrine, they are released to the outside or to a cavity or something. Okay, and because of that, they have to have a duct. So exocrine glands have ducts. Endocrine glands don't, because it's just released straight into the blood. Okay. An exocrine gland, for an example, that releases to the outside would be sweat glands. All right. And then an exocrine gland that will release into a cavity would be the pancreas, as exocrine component, which releases, through the ducts into the pancreas, and then it's secreted into the small intestines. Right? As long as it's going to secrete somewhere, and there needs to be a conduit. Right? So these are multicellular. These two types of glands are multicellular. The one that you had problems with in the module is, classifying a single-celled gland of the goblet. Cells in the small intestine that produce mucus. It's unicellular. It's one cell, unicellular. Right? So we're going to classify them according to the structure of the gland itself. So if it's simple, it's just a tube. It just has one duct. So it will have a tube like this one, where you have the secretory cells, the ones that are producing the product, and then just the cells on the top here that are forming the duct. Right? So simple is just like that. Compound means there is more tubules on it. It's a compound. Like this one, it's got tubules, or it could be acinar or alveoli, which is like circular sacs. Okay? So that's a compound. And then tubules are just a duct duct cells on the top and secretory cells on the bottom. Now these two have the same shape. Okay, so acinar are like this. Okay, but most likely this is filled with the cells that are doing the producing. Okay, like that. But it's still circular. Okay. Alveolar on the other end, like the alveolar in the lungs, you can't have cells in there packing it because you need to put air in it. So it's going to be a hollow sac with flat cells. See what I'm saying? So that's the only difference. Otherwise, it's the same shape. So the alveolar will be like this, and then the cells will be like this, these flat ones, the squamous cells, nucleus. You know what I'm saying? And then it's empty in there, because that's where you find the oxygen in here to be exchanged. So same shape, but just different, arrangement. So this is hollow. The alveoli will be hollow sacs, and that's what you find in the lungs. All right? So and this could be like the cells in the pancreas. Okay, the excretory products, the exocrine portion of the pancreas. Right? So that's how you classify the glands according to the shape of the glands. Now you classify the glands according to the secretory product, how the product is secreted. So membrane glands normally just secrete just a fluid. Okay, it's a fluid secretion with no cellular component, because the gland cells that are producing the secretions do not pitch on anything. None of the parts of the cell will be pinched off. So no cellular component, and it's mostly fluid. Okay, it's just a fluid. Apocrine glands, on the other hand, like the mammary glands, they will pitch off. That's why they have to be columnar or kind of cuboidal shaped, so that when they pitch off, you still have a bit of cell remaining. Okay, so these ones, you have a part of the cell that is pinched off and is secreted with the secretions. All the mixture will be like the milk. Okay, and in fact, mammary glands are modified sweat glands, really. Okay, but they produce milk. Okay, not sweat, but they are modified sweat glands. All right, and the holocrine, just like the name says, hollow for whole cell. So these cells are packed with oily substance. And then when the whole cell is released, so the gland actually releases the whole cell, and then it will burst, and then the mixture of the cellular debris plus the oil is the sebum. And that's what makes our skin oily. Have you ever noticed if you take a bath real quick and you don't have time to put lotion on, you kind of sort of whitish or kind of look ashamed, you look kind of cracked. But after a while, you start to sweat just a little bit, you produce your own oil, the sebum. That's from the sebaceous glands, and you see when we do the skin, the sebaceous glands are associated with the hair follicles. Okay? You produce your own oil, and soon enough, you won't be cracked and kind of whitish in appearance. It will be the natural color. And also, it helps to reduce oil. Anyway, holocrine glands secrete the whole cell, and then it bursts. Okay, so now connective tissue. And connective tissue is going to be classified according to the extracellular material or the cells. Extracellular materials. Because why? We have more of the extracellular materials than we have cells. So we're going to classify it according to what we have the most of. Right? So it's more abundant extracellular. And then that extracellular matrix is made of three things which we'll talk about. Mostly got protein, fibers, and so forth, and we'll talk about that. So this is also another area where you kind of had problems in terms of how you classify connective tissue, and it's based on the extracellular matrix. And then the cells will just be located in small spaces called lacunae within that matrix. Okay. So, like we did with the epithelial tissues, we talk about general functions of connective tissue. Okay. So they enclose, they connect, they separate. Like the muscles, they are separated into bundles by connective tissue membranes covering each muscle bundle, the epimysium, the endomysium, and so on. Okay, so that's separated. Okay, and then of course connective, just like the name says, connective tissue. If I was to ask you about functions of connective tissue and you don't mention connecting, shame on you, right? Because the name says it. So connective tissues to one another, like we talked about in the lab, we said tendons attach muscles to bones, and then ligaments attach bones to bones. Okay, so that's attachment. So we know about that. And then, of course, supporting and moving. The muscle. The muscle is supported, and the framework on which the muscle is loaded is the skeleton. And that's how you move actually, because the bones are your levers, and the muscles contract on the bones and they move the bones. Right? So moving and so forth, and then also the cartilage, and then storing, like adipose tissue, stores twice the amount of energy as carbohydrates. Okay? And then of course cushioning, like behind your eyeballs, there's always some in your orbits, which we'll be doing just now when we go to the lab, we'll be doing the scalp today. So the orbit is got, imagine if the eye was right slap against the bone. That would be bad because the bone is hard. So you have some sort of coating of fat, the adipose tissue on the cushioning. Subcutaneous fat is for insulating so that you don't lose body heat. Subcutaneous fat. Okay, and then of course transport. We don't think of blood as a connective tissue, but it's connective tissue. It's a fluid matrix called plasma. Within it, suspended cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets, which are not cells. They are parts of cells. All right. And where is blood made? Where are blood cells made? In the bone, which is connective tissue proper. I mean, you know, bone is the epitome of connective tissue. All right. So bone, of course, for protecting, and bone marrow makes the blood, which is also a fluid connective tissue. Protecting. What are some of the ways the bones protect us? Your head, for instance, the skull, the cranium encloses the brain. It's all bone, it's enclosed by the bone. Okay, the pelvic girdle, protects your reproductive organs. All right. So, I mean, if I was to ask about general functions of the connective tissue, you don't have to think hard about it. You know what I'm saying? Because these are like intuitive. They make sense. Right? So you don't have to really like, yeah. So bone, again, is based on the matrix because that's what we have the most of. So, I mean, not bone, sorry, connective tissue. It's got a lot of matrix, all right? So there are certain cells that will break the matrix, called osteoclasts, that end with the suffix clast. Certain cells that will maintain the matrix, that ends with the site. Site is a cell, it's like a mature cell, okay? And then certain cells that will produce it, the matrix, like for instance, in the end of the blast. For instance, osteoblasts will produce, osteo means bone, matrix, so produce bone matrix, right? Okay, and then osteocytes will maintain the bone matrix, all right? And then osteoclast, clast to cleave, to break. Osteoclast will break down the bone matrix, okay? We're using bone as an example here. Fibroblasts are also to make the fibers, okay, and so forth and so forth. So these osteoclasts are controlled by a hormone called PTH, which will break down parathyroid hormone, right? And parathyroid hormone is inhibited by steroids, like this testosterone and estrogen. So that's why when women reach menopause, their bones become more brittle because you are breaking them down. You're breaking down the matrix more than you're building it and producing it and maintaining it. Because the osteoclasts become activated. Without the estrogen to inhibit this hormone, then you break down bone more. It's like a double whammy, right? So that's what happens in menopause. Anyway, so these are the cells that produce the matrix. Everything with connective tissue is centered around the matrix, right? And we classify it according to the matrix as well, right? So what is in the extracellular matrix, which is what we had kind of problems with, because it said identify the components of the extracellular matrix. So the first thing is going to be the protein fibers, okay, like the collagen fibers, right, and so forth. And the way these fibers are oriented will determine the strength of that, connective tissue. For instance, in the tendons, you see the tendons, usually you put tensile strength in one direction, like because it's connected to the muscle here, the bone and the muscle, okay? So you only pull it like this when the muscle is contracted. So the fibers will be arranged like this, in one direction, in a very organized way. See what I'm saying? Just like when I said take a piece of string or thread, you can break it apart, but if you have many of them crisscrossing and you try to do this, you won't be able to break it. Same thing with the collagen fibers. If they're oriented in one direction, they'll have that strength in pulling it in that direction. So that's the arrangement of tendons. But then there are some parts where you need like a sheet of connective tissue, such as the sheet that surrounds the heart, the pericardium, for instance, or the one that surrounds the muscle. That one you're going to need to put it this way, you're going to need to put it that way, and you need it to be strong. So the fibers are going to be reticular, which means they're going to be oriented in all the directions, so that if you pull it in any direction, it's going to be strong. So this lends itself to more like sheets, and this sends it to more like long fibers, like the tendons and the ligaments, that are only, you apply pressure on them in one direction. Okay, and then elastic fibers, of course, they will stretch. Usually they are coiled and arranged in kind of sort of every direction, like the elastic tissue in the arteries when they, expand. When blood pumps through, they expand. In fact, the elastic recoil in the arteries is so strong that when it, after the heart pumps blood into the arteries, some of the major arteries like the aorta and them, and when they start to recoil, they create like another heartbeat, if you will, like what is called the dichrotic launch, because that pressure will act as if the heart has, pumped another, amount of blood into the system when it hasn't. Just because of the recoil, helps to push the blood along. And when we do electrophysiology, we'll be able to see the dichrotic launch on the thing when the pulse goes like this, and then it's like a deeper in the contraction of with the recoil, just because of these elastic fibers. All right. And then the ground substance. So the number one thing is the protein fibers. Okay. The ground substance is kind of like the substance that everything is kind of put in, kind of holds it. All right. And the ground substance has what are called proteoglycans. Okay. Proteoglycans are made of the two compounds, the major compounds we talked about, the organic compounds, which and which? Protein, one, and glycan, carbohydrates, right? Proteoglycans are like that. They got protein and carbohydrate in them. And remember, we talked about, what did we say about carbohydrates? The ability to hold water. Remember, they're even named after water, carbohydrates. Okay, so these proteoglycans can hold water, and then, so that means when you expand them, they can lose the water and be flattened, but when you release the pressure, then they go back to their natural shape. Just like the discs, the vertebral discs on your vertebra, you see, it's like a shock absorber. Okay? Because of those proteoglycans and the ability to lose water when you squish on them, and then to regain it and go back to the original shape. So that's the ground substance. It enables connective tissue to return to the original shape when they're compressed. All right? And then the other one is fluid. I know the module kind of tricked you by saying cytoplasm. Cytoplasm, no, it's just a fluid. Okay, it's probably the water that comes into and out of these proteoglycans. When you squish it, compress, and decompress. Right? So, three components of the matrix. Okay, because that's what we have the most of, and in just a few cells. So, after fertilization, we have the germ layers are forming. Part of the germ layers that will form the connective tissue, they start as mesenchyme. So mesenchyme is the mother of all connective tissue. It's embryonic connective tissue that will give rise to all the six embryonic, all the six tissues, connective tissues, that is. All right. So one will be the embryonic connective tissue itself, okay, made of mesenchyme and mucous connective tissue, and then loose connective tissue, and we'll soon talk about where all these are found and so forth, like areola, all substances, organs like the liver and so forth, the spleen, adipose, we talked about all the tissues and so forth, and then of course dense connective tissue that you find in the tendons and so forth. So you have regular and irregular, all right? Tendons with sheets of membranes and so forth, and then elastic, of course, and then cartilage, of course. Hyaline cartilage is what starts off, the fetal skeleton starts off as hyaline cartilage, and then you put onto it mineralization, which makes it hard form. Okay, and some of the extensions of the bones, like the nose, it's got bone here and island cartilage. Connection between the ribs and the sternum, the costal cartilage, island cartilage. All right. And then of course, did I skip some? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3. I was like, wait a minute. We got the blood, which is the fluid matrix. All right. Oh, crap. I went to blood, but blood is the fluid matrix, but the bone is not. Okay, bone is a number to the bone, and I talked about the blood anyway. But the bone, of course, is made up of compact bone and spongy bone. The compact bone has more matrix in it than spaces, and the spongy bone, you can actually see the holes in it. It's got less matrix, more spaces. Okay, and we will talk about that in a little bit. Okay. So those are the 6. So know about mesenchyme because it's the mother of all connective tissue. All the connective tissue arises from the mesenchyme, which is the embryonic connective tissue that will give rise to all 6 connective tissues. And now we'll talk about each of those connective tissues. Now we're going to classify it according to the matrix. What's in the matrix? Loose connective tissue. This was also in your module. Okay, loose connective tissue usually occurs in organs like the spleen and so forth. It kind of holds, it fills spaces. It's under your eyelids, just under the skin of your eyelids, you have loose connective tissue. And that loose connective tissue is called areola. Alright? Areola. So in the module, we couldn't identify that loose connective tissue is called areola. And it fills and holds organs in place. Imagine if the liver didn't have any of these fibers to hold it like that. Isn't it the liver is? Have you seen beef liver or anything? Have you? Because most people here don't eat liver. But where I come from, liver is a delicacy, so we eat it all. A liver is a definite shape. It doesn't just like spread out like that. There's a definite shape, and it's because of those fibers that hold it like that. Okay. So it holds organs in place, and also some things like the lymph nodes and so forth that filter blood, so that they can remain open and they can actually filter so that it doesn't crumble up and collapse on itself. Adipose, we talked about it, cushioning and storage of energy and so forth. Right? So those are the functions of that. And dense connective tissue, we talked about how we find it in tendons. Right? And in tendons, you have the regular connective tissue. And then in membranes or sheaths of connective tissue, we tend to find irregular connective tissue because you need strength in order to do this. Alright? And then of course elastic ligaments, like the ear, see the earlobe, you can stretch it and it comes back to place. It's made up of elastic tissue. And then, so we talk about each of them and just show you where you find the areola. You see how the fibers kind of hold the organs in place. Okay, so packing, support, and sometimes nourish. Okay, so all these membranes, all right, and the organs, the lamina propria of the small intestine as well. It's got that. You know what I'm saying? And the stomach, it is connective tissue, eyelids. Like I was talking about the eyelids. You know, the eyelids, they've got loose areolar tissue on it, just under the skin of the eyelids that holds it in place. Okay, so this is kind of holding in place. Those fibers do that, and then adipose storage. Okay, there's so much of the fat in here that the cytoplasm is just like a rim on the outside. Okay, stores energy, and you find it, of course, in the breast tissue. Behind the orbits, behind the eyes, and so forth. Perirenal fat around the kidneys, pericardial fat around the heart. Doesn't matter how thin you are, you still have fat around the organs for protection. It's adipose tissue, right? Okay, and then reticulum, like we talked about, there are fibers oriented in different directions. The spleen, have you seen the spleen before? It's also another organ, much like the liver. Okay, the spleen kind of filters blood. It's part of the lymphatic system, although it filters blood. So it's an organ that needs to sort of have a definite shape and be able to do the filtration. These lymph nodes filter lymph, right? which is pretty much fluid that came out of blood. So it will monitor it for microorganisms and so forth. That's why if you get hurt somewhere, the lymph node close to it will start to swell because it's draining all the infection from that area, right? So you need this particular tissue to keep it open so that it doesn't collapse on itself and it won't be able to do the filtration. You see what I'm saying? If it's kind of sort of collapsed on itself. Okay, so that's that. And then again, regular connective tissue where the fibers are oriented in one direction, like in collagen, would be good for tendons, right? Because they get pulled in one direction, right? And then the ends irregular, like the dermis is that under the skin, and anything that lends itself to like a sheet, something that's like a membrane or a sheet like your skin under here, the dermis is actually much bigger, and it's all reticular fibers that hold, and then underneath the dermis will be the subcutaneous fat, right? Which you can see the yellow part. And then the muscle, right? And then of course elastic connective tissue, very important in the arteries, very important, well in the earlobe anyway. So those are the connective tissues. So we'll talk about cartilage. All right, cartilage has got hyaline cartilage, which we said, covers the ends of the bones, like those, the caps of the bones that articulate against each other, like on the condyles, in the humerus, in the humerus and in the femur, all right? Okay, you have that hyaline cartilage, okay, and then the fibrocartilage, of course, between the discs, elastic, external ear, so those are the different kinds of cartilage. And then, of course, bone is specialized matrix, all right, made of compact bone where you have more matrix than you have spaces, right? And then, of course, cancellous bone, sometimes called spongy bone because it looks like a sponge. It looks like SpongeBob, all right? Some of you like SpongeBob, so don't get me wrong. It looks like a sponge, okay? And it has more space. It has spaces and a bit of matrix spaces, all right? And then blood, which is lipid matrix. Blood is made in bone marrow. Okay, blood is fluid matrix called plasma, right? And in it are white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. All right, and then the red bone marrow is the hematopoietic tissue. All right, so get that. And this is just showing you some pictures of cartilage and where you might find it. We already talked about it, like the ends of the bones, the joints, because it's smooth, all right? And then at the end, we'll talk about the membranes, like the synovial membranes, which cover the fluid that lubricates the joints. And the caps of them will be the cartilage. You can see cells, and most of it is the matrix, right? And the cells appear in spaces called lacuna. Okay? The spaces in which the cells are located are called lacuna. And for cartilage, the cells are chondrocytes. Right? Okay, so that's that. And then again, here you can see fewer cells, all right, in the fibrocartilage. Because the fibrocartilage, you have a lot more of the collagen fibers to make it really strong. Okay? And of course, elastic cartilage. You can see there's bigger spaces and bigger cells, and it can stretch and come back to the original. And again, the chondrocytes, because it's still cartilage. Because elastic is another cartilage. There you go. And then, of course, bone. Bone is actually concentrically arranged. It's like a sheet that is wrapped up on itself. You see how it looks concentric like this? And then you've got, and the wrapping around concentrically like that gives more tensile compression resistance as well. Just like a steel beam is equal to the compression, the tensile strength of bone is equal to the steel beam. It's that strong because of the orientation of it. This is a compact bone, all right? And so you get the lacuna with the bone cells in the osteocytes, osteoblasts, and so forth, and osteoblasts all located in those spaces, all right? And then, of course, our fluid matrix. Blood is not intuitively, you can't think of it as connective tissue, but it really is. And after all, it is made in connective tissue quite long. Right? It's just a fluid matrix. In it, you have suspended cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. Platelets are just little fragments of cells. Right? So again, muscle tissue. I kind of only need you to know the three muscles. Okay, they are the skeletal muscle because it's connected to the skeleton. Okay, for and then the smooth muscle located in the small intestine and some of the other glands and so forth. And then of course the cardiac muscle only found in the heart. In fact, the cardiac muscle picks the best qualities of skeletal muscle, the best qualities of smooth muscle, and puts it together. Why? Because the cardiac muscle never rests. If you're not sleeping, your heart is beating. It stops when you die. So it's really specialized, and those cells are connected by intercalated discs, which have those gap junctions we talked about that allow it to pass the action potential through all the cardiac muscles, so they contract as one is a function of sensity. Right? Again, we will cover all these guys later on. Okay? So skeletal muscle comprises about half your body is skeletal muscle. 40% is like half your body. Okay? And they are voluntary because you think about it, and these ones are involuntary because they contract automatically by the autonomic nervous system, as well as smooth muscle is autonomic nervous system. So if you see the orientation of the fibers, we'll talk a lot more about them later on. You see how the muscle cells are also called muscle fibers. Why? Because they are longer than they are wide. So it's like a fiber. Right? Because it's that long, it's going to have many nuclei. It's multinucleated. Because one nucleus will not be able to save that whole long cell. Some of them can be as long as 30 centimeters, right? Like the thigh muscles. So, I mean, if you have one nucleus, forget about it, you see? It's not going to work. So, and the nucleus are located on the outside. We'll talk more about it when we discuss the muscle, so that it doesn't disturb the contractile mechanism of the cells. Okay? So, and then the cardiac muscle, because it contracts in not in straight lines like the muscle, like the bicep contracts like that. The heart muscle kind of there's a squeezing motion to it. So that's why it's branched. And then you have the intercalated discs. Okay? And we'll talk more about it when we do muscle. And then this one, smooth muscle, is like spindle shaped. One nucleus because the cells are not that long. Okay? And it's important so that when you and they're connected by gap junctions. Because they contract as if it's one cell. That's why they are nice and short so that they can connect each other and so on. Then you find them in the small intestine. And blood vessels and smooth muscles. Okay. All controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Nervous tissue, again, we've got two types of cells in there. The neurons themselves, which are sort of star-shaped, and they have one long axon, which conducts the action potentials from one tissue to the next, or from one neuron to another neuron. And then we have what are called neuroglia cells, sometimes for short called glial cells. These ones support, nourish the neurons. Okay, so so those are the ones we have. Those two. And again, like I said, we just quickly go through this because we're gonna do the nervous system and we're gonna talk about the cells and all that good stuff in later lectures. Again, this will be the dendrites and so forth, and this is the sheath, which can be covered by this called the the axon covered by the myelin sheath, which just makes faster conduction to the nervous system. And we'll talk more about it. So now we go to membranes. We talked a little bit about membranes when we talked about what? The body cavities, right? So we kind of know about this. Again, we have the membranes that open to the outside, like the respiratory system, the digestive system, the reproductive system. So those are mucous membranes. Okay? Most of the time they produce mucus that lines all those organs, like the mucus in the respiratory system, which traps the particles and gets rid of particulate matter from the respiratory system. Right? And the mucus in the digestive protects from the corrosive nature of the acid. Right? So that's that. So we know about mucous membranes. We kind of did them last time. We know about serous membranes. These ones cover body cavities that don't open to the outside, like the in the thoracic cavity, the abdominal cavity, the lungs covered by pleura, the abdominal covered by peritoneum, right? It doesn't open, and they usually occur in pairs with the fluid, serous fluid, the produce serous fluid that lubricates those organs. All these organs in these systems, what do? They expand and contract. The intestines do that when they're mixing food and doing that. The heart does the same thing, contract and expand. And everything does that. The lungs do the same thing, contract and expand. When they're filling in with air and they're pushing air out. So we know about that already. Okay. And then the one we did talk about is synovial membranes. And these ones occur in the joints, right? And it's a membrane that contains synovial fluid, which lubricates the joints. So when you have things like arthritis and some of the joint problems, or inflammation of these membranes, the synovial membranes, and the fluid may leak out or do stuff, or it may be, and then it will stop lubricating, and then you have problems, grittiness between joints and stuff. It's painful, really painful. People who have arthritis will tell you that, right? And it's because of the synovial membrane for freely moving joints, right? So that's why you shouldn't pop your fingers, because when you pop your fingers, you're kind of like popping that synovial fluid, the synovial membrane, you know what I'm saying? And it's not good. People like to do that. What are you doing, man? You know, you're messing up. Yeah, people do that, you know, and they're popping that fluid in the membranes. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So, don't do it. It may sound cool, but it's not cool. So we know about this. Red ones open to the outside, the blue ones, the peritoneum and the pleural cavities don't open to the outside. So serous membranes and mucous membranes. Okay, so we know about that. We did it when we did about the cavities. Inflammation, I just talk about it because that's how you bring a lot of blood to the tissues to repair. And I'll finish off talking about repairing, tissues at the end. So cover that. So an inflammatory response is pretty much when you have all these inflammatory mediators released, it expands the blood vessels, the capillaries, and the gaps between the capillaries gets bigger so that the white blood cells come out. To do what? Take care of the infection. Like when you get cut, it becomes red after a while. All right. Clots first to close up loss of blood, so that when blood rushes to the area to bring all those white blood cells, it's not going to keep coming out. So that's why when you talk about the repair process, we have clotting first, then inflammation occurs. All right. So what is inflammation? You get the redness, of course, because of the blood coming in, and then because blood carries the heat throughout the body, it becomes warm. You can see if there's an inflamed area, it's nice and warm because of that. But because you're getting a whole bunch of blood and fluids coming out of the blood vessels, it disturbs the function of that. So that's why inflammation, while it's good because it's bringing a lot of blood cells to take care of the infection, it's going to disturb the function of that for a while. So it's going to be painful, right? So I'm saying, and then it's going to disturb the function of that. So those are kind of what happens during inflammation when you're trying to. So that chronic inflammation is not good. When something constantly gets inflamed, you're going to eventually lose function from those cells, all right? And it interferes with the healing process. Okay? So that's why I'm going to show you the healing process more. So this is inflammation again. In the morning I just jumped through quickly, but it's showing introduction of bacteria, and then it's going to show the clotting, and then the white blood vessels. The white blood cells come out of the to take care of the bacteria out of the capillaries. But what I want you to know is the tissue repair, how it happens. Okay, so generally in the body we have three kinds of cells in the tissues. The liver cells, like the skin ones, we'd call them liver because they're constantly reproducing, right? Like I said, after 30 or so days, you have brand new skin on top of them. Okay, when you go to when the ladies go to the fashion guys or whatever it is, they get exfoliation. What they're doing is removing the dead skin on top and leaving the nice new skin, and they come looking more beautiful or whatever. It's because the skin is newer skin. So when you do an exfoliation, you're just hastening the process of the natural removal of the top layer of skin, so that you have brand new, nice cells on the bottom. Okay. So those will be level cells that constantly reproduce and able to integrate. Then there's some cells called stable cells. Those ones will reproduce when it's necessary, but they're usually not very active in restoring themselves. And then the permanent cells have very little ability to divide, such as the neurons. The neurons in your brain, they do not divide because they don't even have centrioles that are necessary for division. So those are permanent cells. So you need to maintain your neurons properly. You don't want to get a stroke, because when those denied of oxygen, those cells, those neurons may die, and then you can't replace them. You know what I'm saying? And cells like the muscle cells are also permanent cells, but muscles do a lot more than the nervous system does. You know what I'm saying? Because muscles are contracting all the time, they're tearing, they're breaking. So in muscles, you have what are called satellite cells, which are like stem cells in the muscle. That if a muscle tears, those stem cells can reproduce and form new muscle cells, new muscle tissue. Although the muscle cells themselves are permanent, they are not going to divide again. They do have those satellite cells, which are like stem cells. Sometimes the satellite cells can fuse with a broken muscle fiber to mend it, especially if you work out, you're going to tear some muscles. So you need the satellite cells for that. Those are permanent cells. Unfortunately, the neurons don't have a replacement, in the brain. You lose them, you lose them. So you gotta keep exercising the brain as you go forward. So this is what I wanted you to note about tissue repair. Whenever there's a cut or anything, you first form the clot. What does the clot do? Stops the bleeding, stops the further bleeding. Then once you have controlled the bleeding, then you have inflammation. Because inflammation, you rush blood to the area, and then it brings with it white blood cells and so forth. And then you form granulation tissue, which is like an intermediate between the cells that will be the final tissue, whatever the tissue is. You're going to be making some connective, some epithelial or whatever. So the granulation tissue is kind of like the stem cells that will then become the different tissues you need to repair. And then it will go. If you have a big cut and the ends of the wounds are far apart, like if you have a white gash, a cut, what happens is that there's a wound contracture where all those cells, they contract to try and bring the edges closer together. But sometimes that will bring scarring, a lot of scarring because of that kind of contraction. Okay, because it's an attempt to bring the wounds close together. Okay. So sometimes if it's a big cut, you need to suture it up. Because if you leave it open like that, it will take a much longer time for it to close up. Okay. All right, so that's the wound contraction there. So these are the processes. You get a blood clot, you get a cut, and then the blood will clot, and then you start to build the macrophages, take care of the bugs and so forth, and then you form the granulation tissue, and then you start forming the epidermis. You see how the epidermis is forming underneath, the new epidermis. Eventually that will kind of rise up and then create a scar up here, right? And then the granulation tissue will then replace. They are like fibroblasts that will create the new cells that you need to replace it. Okay, right? Okay, quickly. Tissue aging is the last bit, and so as we age, everything slows down. Everything. Making new cells, all those things, elasticity, losing elasticity in like your blood vessels, okay, in like your skin. So that's why the skin wrinkles. Okay, so that's how the tissues will age. Injuries will heal more slowly because the production of new cells, they're stopping to replicate. They're getting tired. They've been doing it for ages. So when you're grown up, when you're old, we're all grown up, right? Okay, we're not old yet, except some of us. But the cells will divide slowly. Everything happens slowly. You walk slowly. If you get hit by a car, it's natural causes because you're walking slow. It's not an accident. Don't mind that. So anyway, extracellular matrix containing the collagen and elastic fiber becomes less. And connective tissue is extracellular matrix because that's what we have most of. and so it becomes weak and so forth. And then with that, loss of elasticity, loss of connective tissue, that's how the skin becomes. Right? And then of course bones break more easily, especially in women when they reach menopause again, because the estrogens are no longer there to inhibit parathyroid hormone, which activates osteoclasts that cleave the matrix. Alright, and that's it. Thank you guys. We shall see you in a little bit. Okay, thank you. I don't think I need to give you 5. Do you want? Because we finished 10 minutes late. We start at 5 anyway, 5 o'clock. I don't need to give you 5 minutes extra. We'll still be at 15. Right? Thank you guys, I appreciate it.